John Lewis and I first met as college students, 19-year-old college students, back in 1960. And several years ago, in the Shelby v. Holder case, when the Supreme Court handed down that decision, John and I talked a lot about the efforts that we had undertaken as college students and what that decision meant. We started talking about the throwback to those years when people in the South, most especially, were subjected to such indignities like counting or determining how many beans, jelly beans, were in a jar in order to qualify to vote. Asked to interpret the Constitution for people who could not even read the Constitution. But then, in the run-up to the last presidential election, I started hearing things, started seeing things that reminded me not so much of what we did out on the streets in the 1960s, but it reminded me of the things I was studying in the classrooms. And one thing particularly came to mind. And I went back and I did the research to find it, and I found it in this document. And it was a memorandum written by a man named Martin Witherspoon Gary, a Confederate general from Edgefield, South Carolina, who wrote a memorandum instructing Wade Hampton and others on how to go about nullifying the impact of the formerly enslaved African Americans who in the South were showing up in great numbers and holding office, and they decided in the 1876 presidential election to nullify those votes. And all that I was hearing during that campaign and what I heard during that dreadful day that the insurrection took place in this building is all in this document. This is nothing new. I'm convinced that those on the other side either studied it or were taught it, and they did, after the elections, exactly what's in this document. So this is not an issue that ought to just unify the members of this Congress. This should unify the people of this country, because unless we are looking forward to reliving those days of Jim Crow that followed the slaughterhouse cases of 1872, just like Shelby v. Holder, we are in for some tough times unless we can reauthorize this John R. Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, which will protect the franchise for people who are really believers in this democracy, people who have given their all to make sure that everybody has a free, unfettered right to vote. And we are not going to do that unless we can rally the American people to do the things that are necessary to maintain this democracy and our greatness as a country.